Hi everyone, my name is Elaiza Margarita Tinos from BSN 1A, and I was given the topic of some basics in microbiology to present for this class. So in this presentation, we are going first talk about the major structure of the cell, which is the prokaryotic and eukaryotic cell. On Earth, there are two major types of cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Prokaryotic cells are the simplest and most ancient type of cells. They were the only form of life on Earth for billion years before eventually giving rise to eukaryotic cells. If you take a look at prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells side by side, you can see the number of differences. To begin with, prokaryotic cells are a lot smaller than eukaryotic cells and have a simplest structure. But bear in mind that this simple structure is actually a good thing for prokaryotes because it allows them to reproduce very quickly and very effectively. If you want to look inside a prokaryotic cell, you would probably be surprised how simple it is. For example, prokaryotic cells are lack of nucleus. In fact, the name prokaryotic actually gives you a hint about its structure. Karya means nucleus and pro means before. So basically, the word prokaryote means before nucleus. The inside of the prokaryotic cell is basically an open unit with no compartments and non-membrane bound organelles. However, a small structure called ribosomes are scattered throughout inside the cytoplasm. The cells of DNA is located in the region of the cytoplasm of the nucleoid region. The nucleoid region is not the same thing as nucleus because it's not enclosed by membrane. Prokaryotes also have a cell wall that surrounds the plasma membrane. The composition of cell wall depends on whether the cell is an archaean or bacteria, but basically it consists of complex polysaccharides. Prokaryotes also often possess one or more flagella, which is used for movement. In contrast, eukaryotic cells contain a membrane-bound nucleus and other bound organelles. The name eukaryote also gives a hint by its structure. Eu means true, and remember that karya means nucleus. So in essence, the word eukaryote means true nucleus. Eukaryotic cells are larger and much more complicated than prokaryotic cells. However, they do share a few things in common with prokaryotes. Let's take a look in Venn diagram to compare prokaryotes to eukaryotes. It's also to see what areas they are in common. Let's start with their commonalities. Both prokaryotes and eukaryotes have DNA or genetic material, have ribosomes, have cytoplasm, and have a plasma membrane. Now let's look some of the ways they're different. Prokaryotic cells are the oldest type of cell. They're small and relatively simple. Eukaryotic cells are evolved from prokaryotic cells. Later, they are larger and more complex eternally. Prokaryotes are both lack of nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. Eukaryotic cells have a nucleus and also contain organelles. Prokaryotes are single-celled organisms. Eukaryotes can be either single-celled or multicellular. And finally, the DNA of the prokaryote are originally organized by the single circular chromosomes, but the DNA of eukaryotes is organized as multiple linear chromosomes. Other difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells differ in their structure. The major difference exhibited by these cells are mentioned below. Prokaryotic cell is a relatively simple, small cell ranging from 1 to 2 micrometers. Eukaryotic cells are complex large cells ranging from 10 to 100 micrometers. Prokaryotic cell possess rigid cell wall which prevents rupture of the cell. Eukaryotic cells has no rigid cell wall in vertebrates, but in plants, cell wall is. Prokaryotic cell membrane-bound organelles are absent. In eukaryotic cells, membrane-bound organelles are present. Prokaryotic cell genetic material is not enclosed in nuclear membrane. In eukaryotic cell, genetic material is enclosed in a well-defined nuclear membrane. Prokaryotic cells, genetic material consists of single circular or endless double helical molecule of DNA. In eukaryotic cell, there are many chromosomes formed of linear, open-ended double helical molecules of DNA. In prokaryotic cell, DNA remains uncombined with proteins, while eukaryotic cell DNA remains combined with proteins. Fuel gene stain will not stain the chromosome in prokaryotic cell, while the eukaryotic cell fuel gene stain will stain the chromosome. In prokaryotic cell, nucleolus is absent, while in eukaryotic cell, nucleolus is present, rich in RNA. Prokaryotic cell, centriole is absent. In eukaryotic cells, centriole is present in animal cells but absent in plant cell. Prokaryotic cells, cell division by binary fission, mitosis and meiosis are absent. Eukaryotic cell, cell division of somatic cells takes place through mitosis, but in reproductive cells, meiotic cell division takes place. In prokaryotic cell, no spindle fiber formation during cell division. In eukaryotic cell, spindle fibers form during cell division. Prokaryotic cell, Golgi body is absent. In eukaryotic cell, Golgi body is present. Prokaryotic cell, endoplasmic reticulum is absent. In eukaryotic cell, endoplasmic reticulum is present. Prokaryotic cell, ribosomes dispersed in cytoplasm. In eukaryotic cell, ribosomes are present both in cytoplasm as well as the surface of the endoplasmic reticulum. Prokaryotic cell, plastids are absent. Eukaryotic cell, plastids are absent in animal cells except a few but present in plant cells. Prokaryotic cell, lysosomes are absent. In eukaryotic cell, lysosomes are present in animal cells and mystematic plant cells. Prokaryotic cell, mitochondria are absent and the respiratory function is done by plasma membrane, while eukaryotic cell, the mitochondria are present and contain numerous enzymes, circular double helical DNA, and mitochondrial RNA. In prokaryotic cells, the vacuoles are absent. In eukaryotic cell, small vacuoles are present in animal cells, and large vacuoles are present in plant cells. The prokaryotic cell photosynthetic pigments are scattered in photosynthetic lamellae. In eukaryotic cell, photosynthetic pigments are located in the plastids. Now let's move on to the reproduction of organisms in the cells. There are two methods of reproduction, the sexual and asexual reproduction. Let's start with sexual reproduction. Organisms reproduce to pass on their genetic information and increase the population. Some reproduce through asexual reproduction, which requires only one parent. Others reproduce through sexual reproduction, requiring two parents. Now we will focus on sexual reproduction, on how it works, its advantages and disadvantages. In sexual reproduction, a new offspring is produced by combining the genetic information of two parents. Because the offspring has genetic information from both parents, it will look similar but different from its parents. This type of reproduction increases the genetic variation in the population. So how sexual reproduction works? In order for a parent to pass on only half of its genetic information, its sex cells must go through a process of meiosis. Meiosis is a form of cell division that results in four cells having a half number of chromosomes as the original cell. The egg from the female combines the sperm from the male. When this happens, the chromosome from each parent combine to create a new offspring with a full set of chromosomes. With sexual reproduction, the offspring looks similar but different from each other and their parents. This is because there are thousands of genes that code for different traits of an organism's chromosomes. Each time uses occurs the alleles of the genes are randomly split. This is why you look similar to your brother or sisters, and yet you are different. Let's look some at advantages and disadvantages. Due to more genetic variation, if the environment changes, some organisms in the population will be better adapted to it than others, and they will be able to survive and reproduce, keeping the population growing. The genetic variation of the population will also help it fight against a new predator or disease, since once again some individuals would be better suited to resist the disease or escape the new predator, allowing them to reproduce and keep that population. However, because it does require two parents, it takes a lot longer to increase the population than with asexual reproduction. Recovering from a major environmental change could take a long time. So in summary, sexual reproduction requires two parents. The offsprings are genetically similar but different. There is genetic variation. They are better able to adapt to a changing environment. It is more difficult for a new predator or disease to destroy the entire population. It is more but it's slower to increase the population. Now let's move on in asexual reproduction. Most people think of reproduction as requiring a female in the male to create a new offspring. However, there are times when only one parent is needed to produce more offspring. In asexual reproduction, organisms reproduce offspring on its own. There is only one parent, and the offspring will inherit all of its genes from that single parent. The offspring and the parent are genetically identical. There is no genetic variation. You might be familiar with same organisms that reproduce asexually like single-cell bacteria and parameciums, but multicellular organisms can also reproduce asexually like the strawberries, hydra, starfish, and even some species of sharks. There are different ways that asexual reproduction can occur. One way is through binary fission. This occurs mostly in single-celled organisms like bacteria. Genetic material gets copied and then the organism splits in half, creating organisms that are identical to the original organisms. Mitosis is very similar. In single-celled eukaryotes, these are organisms with a nucleus. They have a form of binary fission called mitosis. Like binary fission, mitosis involves the copying of the genetic material and the splitting of the cell. However, it also includes the splitting of the nucleus. Another form is through budding. This happens when a new organism develops from a growth or a bud on the side of the organism. The new growth has the same genetic information as the parent and eventually detaches from the parent and grows on its own. You might have seen vegetative reproduction in your own garden. Many plants are able to reproduce without releasing seeds or spores. They have special features that allow them to pass on their genetic information to their offspring. For example, strawberries produce runners that allow new plants at the end of them to grow, Bulb plants like garlic are able to split their bulbs, creating more plants. Fragmentation occurs when an organism splits or loses parts of its body. The remaining parts can grow and form a new organism. This can be seen in starfish. When they lose an arm, they can grow it back, and the separate arm can grow into a new starfish as well. Some animals like fish, birds, and reptiles are able to switch from sexual reproduction to asexual reproduction. They do this by creating offspring from unfertilized eggs. This is called parthenogenesis. The genetic material, the offspring are identical to the parents. For example, in January 2017, a leopard shark in an Australian aquarium that had no contact with the male shark gave birth to offspring that were genetically identical to her. There are some advantages and disadvantages to reproducing asexually. For the advantages, they can reproduce at a rapid rate and quickly increase their population. However, due to no genetic variation, if the environment changes, it will become more difficult to adapt to that new change. And another disadvantage is that if a new predator or disease is able to kill one of the organisms, then it will be able to kill all the organisms in the population. So, in summary, in asexual reproduction has one parent, the offspring are genetically identical to it, there is no genetic variation, it allows for a quick increase in the population, more difficult to adapt to a changing environment, and the predator or disease could more easily destroy the entire population. Next, we will discuss about the taxonomy. Taxonomy is the science of classifying life according to shared characteristics. And what I'm going to introduce to you are the levels of classification. The levels of taxonomy, each individual level is called a taxon. You might know that they start off very broad. The taxon called domain is the broadest of the categories. And in every taxon underneath, it becomes a little more specific kingdom. And then phylum, then class, order, and within an order could be many families within a family, could be many genus, within a genus could be many species, and so you see the levels become more and more specific as you go down now. One thing you might have a hard time remembering is just kind of the order, so sometimes it helps to make a little mnemonic trick, and so maybe something like, "Dear King Philip came over for good spaghetti." Something silly, make up your own, of course, but something silly, just say. You remember the order of these taxonomy levels, and the point of this is to easily show relationship. You'll see a good examples of that in just a moment. Well, let's look at an example. The taxonomy levels of a leopard. You can see there's a bunch of organisms in this collage, and the leopard being one of them. Well, if ever to say, a leopard is in the broad category. In this domain category called Eukarya. Eukaryotes, these are organisms whose cells have a nucleus and a membrane-bound organelles. While not everything in this collage is a UK, it's a domain. Eukarya, the bacteria that is flashing, they are not in the domain, but everything else is in this domain called eukaryote. So you can see what I mean by its very broad category, but the next level down should be a little more specific, and the next level down would be the kingdom called an Animalia. Look at the collage, not everything in this that's remaining is an animal. The tree and the mushroom are flashing because they've been eliminated. They are not the kingdom called Animalia. But all the other organisms that you see are so, even though kingdom of Animalia is a little more specific, It's still pretty broad, but the next level down should be even a little more specific. The next level down being the phylum, called chordate. These are animals with backbones, and so right now, the snail, the crab, and the insect, they're flashing because yes, these are animals, but they are not animals with backbone. So the next level down, phylum Chordata, you can see it's a little more specific, but it's still pretty broad. The next level down should be add even more clarity and more specificity, which is in the class called Mammalia. The mammals, well, the fish, the eagle, and the frog are flashing because they're not mammals, but all the organisms that are left. You can see every level down becomes a little more specific than the one before it, but still the category of mammals is still pretty broad. There's a lot of mammals, so the next level down should add even a little more clarity. The order of leopards are in an order, but the name of carnivore. The carnivores, the meat eaters, well, that would eliminate the gorilla and the rabbit. But you can still see there is still a good number of meat-eating mammals, so even the next level down should add even more clarity. Leopards are in a family by the name of Felidae. The Felidae family, well, that would eliminate the bear and the wolf. Bear and wolves are not cats, and so in the Felidae family, we have these three, the lion, the cougar, and the leopard. But even at this lower level, you can see it's still kind of. So the next level down, leopards are in a genus by the name of Panthera. Well, that would eliminate the cougars in a different genus category, but the lion and the leopard are both in the genus called Panthera. So even at this very lower level, well, second to the last level, you can see that it's still somewhat broad because it applies to more than one species. And finally, leopards are the species name is Pardus, and so that would eliminate our lion. And so finally, we have the taxonomy levels of leopard. Now I just want to highlight the domains in the kingdom levels. The taxonomy of the taxon is just at the top. The domain in the kingdom levels, and so when it comes to the domain, there are three big broad categories or domains. One of them is called the domain bacteria. And these are prokaryotic cells, meaning they are lack of nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles. They have a chemical in their cell wall called peptidoglycan. And then there's the domain called the domain archaea. Like bacteria, archaea are also prokaryotic. They lack of peptidoglycan in their cell wall. And one of their more, well-known characteristics is their ability to survive in incredibly harsh location. I'll mention a few in a moment. And then there's the domain, as I said earlier, the domain called Eukarya. These are eukaryotic organisms. Their cells possess a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. Now within these domains is the next level down, the kingdoms. And currently classification of most would kind of argue that there are 6 classification of kingdoms. However, these kingdoms are fluid. They've been updated over the years and will continue to be updated. Some will argue that the 6 kingdom classification system might be a little outdated, but right now I think most tend to recognize are the 6 kingdoms of life. And so within the domain bacteria is the kingdom called the Eubacteria. That are the common bacteria, the everyday bacteria that we encounter in our day-to-day life, and the reason why we practice good hygiene. These are the bacteria, such as Escherichia coli, that might live in our intestines, and in some cases could get us sick. In the domain Archaea, the kingdom called Archaea. Not very original, I know, but some people call this kingdom of Archaea bacteria. And I said they can live in an extremely harsh environment, such as really salty locations, much saltier than the oceans, really hot locations, and even anaerobic, no oxygen environment. And within the domain Eukarya, there's actually 4 kingdoms. The kingdom called Protists. These are tend to be single-celled organisms like the amoebas and paramecia that swim around typically in water locations. And then there are 3 big kingdoms, and everybody recognizes it. The fungus, the plants, in the animals. Now let's move on to infectious agents. To understand infectious agents, we need to first understand the basic of infectious agents. So the broad and simple definition is something that infiltrates another living being, and infectious agents can infiltrate and affect several different types of living beings. Some of those would be our pets or other animals. But for the purpose of this presentation, we're mostly just going to focus on infectious agents related to humans. There are four different classes: viruses, bacteria, fungi, and parasites. So we're gonna start off by learning about viruses. Viruses are very small and they're non-living, and they invade the cells of living organisms. They're much smaller than the other three types of infectious agents, and they are also the only one that is considered to be non-living. They're a small type, just like I said, and they're the only agent that cannot replicate outside of a host cell because they are non-living. Once they invaded a host cell, the virus begins to multiply. They can be made up of DNA or RNA. They will never be made up of both, and they most often only have like one or two strands of either DNA or RNA. And these cells are protected by a code of protein, so you'll notice they don't really share any kind of resemblance with a human cell. They don't have a cell wall, they don't have a nucleus, and they don't have any of that, so the DNA or RNA is just free floating around the cell. Then we have bacteria. They're single-celled and they are living microorganisms. They are significantly larger than viruses, but they're still very small compared to parasites and fungi. They are made up of DNA surrounded by cell wall and membrane, and some can even have a tail, which is called a flagellum, to help them move. So bacteria are able to move on their own because they're living and they have a cell wall on a membrane, which starts to resemble more of a human cell, but they're still lacking of nucleus. Bacteria cause many different types of diseases. Some are mild, but some can be very dangerous. And I included this because this is a common misconception that may have. Not all bacteria are bad. Most are actually helpful. I know that a lot of us carry a misconception that all bacteria are harmful and bad, but the truth is most of them are actually helpful, but for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to focus on just the bad bacteria. Then we have the parasites. Parasite is a type of eukaryote, larger group of organisms. And this is the first cell that we see that starts to resemble more of a human-like cell. They're larger and they have defined nucleus. Some parasites are made up of one cell, but some are made of multiple cells, so the size of parasites can vary pretty drastically. Parasites live on or in a host and they act nutrients from that. So that's defining characteristics of parasites. Some cause disease and some can cause pain, and some are never noticed and they just kind of they die of their own. And we never really know that they were the most common examples of parasites that we would likely to see, especially lice, ticks, flatworms, and roundworms. Our fourth class is fungi. Fungi are eukaryotes just like parasites. They have more human-like cell with a nucleus. They vary in shape and size, and there's many different types of fungi. There's actually more than 100,000 different species. So just like parasite, the size of fungi can vary pretty drastically. Fungi usually cannot move on their own, but they also do produce by spores, which we will talk about spores on a later side, but common examples of fungi are yeast, mushrooms, and molds. Next, we're gonna look at some common diseases. These are viruses, cause influenza, which is the flu, cause the common cold, measles, and hepatitis. Bacteria commonly cause tuberculosis, cholera, strep throat, and tetanus. Parasites can cause malaria, scabies, and fungi often cause ringworm, fungal meningitis, and thrush. And finally, we will discuss the protozoan, fungi, algae, lichens, and slime mold. One of the category of microorganisms are called the Protozoa. As the name suggests, proto stands for primitive while zoan means animal. So wait a second, are we saying these are organisms primitive to animals? Yes, they are unicellular in nature. However, the single cell has highly complex functions. Hence, they are also referred to as the pinnacle of unicellular complexity. So, what do you think will be their structure? Well, they have a typical eukaryote cell structure. Just the nucleus in the membrane-bound organelles form an integral part of the cell. Many of them possess food vacuoles, which are used to store food, and these cells do not have a cell wall. Are there any more special features? Many of them have additional features like cilia or flagellum for locomotion. Cilia are these tiny hair-like structures which are present throughout the body. Flagellum, on the other hand, is usually a slender long filament which is single or rarely multiple in number. Now, this was their structure. What could be their nutrition type? Here we are referring to whether they are autotrophic, that is self-nourishing, or heterotrophic, meaning they cannot prepare their own food. We know that these cells are like animal cells and have mobility. So, do you think they will be autotrophic like plants? Of course not. These are heterotrophic in nature. Yes, they are dependent on other organisms as their food source. Only a few more exceptions, including the chlorophyll-containing euglena. It usually performs photosynthesis, but others lack the capacity to do so. Many organisms belong to the protozoan group or wall-no parasites. They derive nutrition directly from the body of living organisms, so they do not kill the host but do harm them severely. A few commonly known examples of protozoans include amoeba, euglena, paramecium, and the disease-causing plasmodium. So this was about the protozoa. So next is the fungi, algae, and lichens and how they working together. Among the trees, the rocks, the moss in the water is an often overlooked organism, but an amazing organism in that is like it a lichen. It is a composite organism which is the result of algae or cyanobacteria, living among the filaments of multiple fungi, species in a mutualistic relationship. If you recall, cyanobacteria is a type of bacteria that can obtain their energy through photosynthesis, and they are the only prokaryotes to be able to do this. Lichen may act plant-like, but lichen are not plants. Lichens may have tiny leafless branches, they may have flat leaf-like structures that look like flakes, or they may just appear like powdered substance. While the algae or cyanobacteria help the fungi by producing carbon compounds that they use in return, the fungi benefit the algae or cyanobacteria by protecting them from the environment and also to help gather moisture and provide an anchor. Lichens do not have roots, and they do not need to tap into a reservoir of water like plants need to. Therefore, they can grow in impossible places that plants can, such as bare rock and sand. You will find them on monuments and acting like epiphytes on the side of trees. Lichens can also survive periods of extreme drought. It is estimated that 6% of the Earth's land surface is covered by lichens. Lichens are long-lived and some consider them to be some of the oldest living organisms on Earth. When a disaster happens, such as volcano, lichens are the first pioneer species. They will grow on bare rock or other places. Lichens may need to compete with plants for access to sunlight, but because of their small size and slow growth, they can thrive in places that plants have difficulty for. So that is the fungi, algae, and lichen working together. And lastly is the slime molds. Slime molds are saprophytic protists. Slime molds are fungus-like organisms that use spores to reproduce. During some of slime molds' life cycles, they appear gelatinous part, hence the name slime. Slime molds have been found all over the world and feed on microorganisms that live in any type of dead plant material. These organisms are usually found in soil, lawns, and other forest floor, commonly on deciduous logs. In tropical areas, they are also common on inflorescence, fruits, and in aerial situations. For example, in the canopy of trees. In urban areas, they are found on mulch or even in the leaf mold in gutters. Most slime molds are smaller than a few centimeters, but some species may reach sizes of up to several square meters and masses of up to 30 grams. Many have striking colors such as yellow, brown, and white. One of the most commonly encountered slime molds both in nature and forest in the temperate zones of the earth as well as in classrooms and laboratories is the yellow Physarum polycephalum. So that's it for this presentation. Thanks for watching.